I am Curran Bhatia, joined by Chris Mannix. You know him as the senior writer at Sports Illustrated. He works for The Zone Boxing. You've seen him everywhere. Chris, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm doing good, and I have a lot I wanted to talk to you about. We know you're on the ground for the Vergil Ortiz fight. It seems like there's been some recent developments. I know it's all coming together very quickly, but it looks like there may be a change in plans for what Vergil Ortiz had planned for this weekend, right?
Yeah, the details are still coming in as we're recording this on Thursday morning, but my understanding is that the Vergil Ortiz Eimantas Stanionis fight will be called off. And this is due to some kind of health issue related to Vergil Ortiz. We know Vergil over the last year has been battling complications from rhabdo, which is a significant illness that affects his muscles and affects his ability to do a lot of things. I don't know as we are speaking if that's directly connected, but that's something that obviously has plagued Vergil Ortiz really over the last year and a half as he's risen up the welterweight division. So it's incredibly disappointing because Ortiz Stanionis, I think, had a chance to be one of the best fights of the year, maybe the best fight of the year, given their talent level and their explosive styles. But as we're speaking, my understanding is Ortiz is out and that fight is off.
It's such a tough situation for boxing fans because we never get the fights we want, and then we start to get them and they're getting canceled, and that's obviously such a tough one for boxing fans. Most importantly, I think, of course, is Vergil Ortiz's health, and he should do everything he can to protect that going forward. That's more important than anything else. To put it in perspective of boxing, though, for Vergil Ortiz, I mean, this is one of the best young fighters in the game. I mean, he's absolutely exceptional when he's in there. But the question is, of course, being in there, and this has become an issue for him in his career. I'm just asking to speculate here, just going forward for him in his career. I mean, these conditions and these physical things that he's dealing with, this is going to be a problem for him going forward.
Yeah, and I don't want to get too ahead of myself with exactly why this fight was canceled and what it's connected to, but it has been a really problematic last year or so for Vergil since he's been diagnosed with rhabdo. He appeared on my podcast just the other day, and we were talking about kind of how he was dealing with it. And he had felt at that time that he had gotten a hold of it. They had figured out the right ways to treat it so that it doesn't affect him. And he felt good about where he was at when we spoke. But now, obviously, something has happened that has set him back, and it's kind of chilling, to be honest, because Vergil is 25 years old. Guys this young, you don't often hear about stuff like this impacting them. So you hope for the best with him that that there could be some moving forward from this. But given how many times he's had to deal with this type of thing, if it is in fact this type of thing, what we're talking about, it does raise a lot of serious questions about, what his future is going to be.
It's always tough when it happens to a young fighter. I believe Sugar Ray Leonard, around the same age, had really bad eye issues. Obviously, he was able to turn that around and come back and leave a legacy in the sport. But most important is Vergil Ortiz's health, and he should get that taken care of. I know this is all coming together very quickly, and so this is, again, asking you to just play speculation. Do you think this fight has already been rescheduled once? Do you think this fight would get rescheduled again, or is it just way too premature to even think about that at this point?
Probably way too premature to even speculate on. We're going to have to find out just how serious this condition is that Vergil is dealing with, and what that means for his career moving forward. I'm sure if you're Stanionis, you want to be active as well. I mean, Stanionis hasn't fought since April of 2022 on the undercard of that Errol Spence Urdanis Ugas fight. So he's going to want to get back out, whether it's against Vergil Ortiz or get against somebody else. I would imagine that Stanionis looks to fight sooner rather than later. He does have that WBA belt, which, look, we all assume is going to become a full title once the Spence Crawford dust up gets taken care of in late July. But I think he's going to want to be active, I would imagine. And Vergil Ortiz, we don't know anything about when or if he's going to be able to get back in the ring.
Well, we wish Vergil Ortiz the best with the situation he's dealing with right now. And so in terms of, we mentioned boxing fans, we always want these fights. We are getting a very interesting fight. And this is actually what I was planning to start off the podcast with, the news that came out last week. And I know you were all over this story. And that's, of course, Canelo Alvarez. We all assumed he was going to take on Jermall Charlo. That's not what's happening. He's taking on Jermell. And I know you reported on this heavily. A very interesting turn of events. It's debatable whether it's a tougher fight or not. I think there's a lot of good arguments either side that it could actually be a tougher fight for Canelo. We're talking about issues of people not fighting, and I'm just curious to your thoughts here. Jermall, it's been mentioned that it was personal issues, and we know that the WBC had come out in support of him for mental health challenges. I've always said this for fighters, that I think taking time off to get mental health figured out is a great thing. It's good to not perform when you're not at your best. Take the time you need. Is that what you feel like Jermall is dealing with? Is it like a mental health type thing? Is there other personal issues? Because whatever it is, it must be something pretty big to turn down probably one of the biggest fights or paydays for him in Canelo Alvarez.
Yeah, look, the Jermall Charlo issues are legit. He has been dealing with a back issue, but the issues that are keeping him from fighting Canelo Alvarez are more to do with his personal life. He's been dealing with a significant family issue right now, and he and his team just decided, they're basically said, look, we're going to be preparing for the biggest fight of our careers. This is make or break for us. This is our opportunity to, fight, one of the best in boxing and take our career to the next level. And they didn't believe he could do it. Not with everything going on in his personal life. I don't believe this is any kind of conspiracy. I don't believe there's any kind of bait and switch here. When Canelo Alvarez agreed to this 3-fight deal with PBC, Jermall Charlo was the first fight of that deal. The second fight, it might have even been Jermell Charlo. Jermell might have been earmarked for that second go around, but Jermall Charlo was the one that was penciled in to this spot. And with him out, look, Jermell, I give him credit. He was facing a mandatory obligation against Tim Tszyu, and that would have been relatively high risk and relatively low reward in a mandatory fight against Tim Tszyu. Now he gets the chance to move up in weight and have his kind of dare to be great moment, to put himself up against one of the very best in boxing in a high profile fight that will earn him a career best payday. So I think Jermell, even though I'm sure it's difficult for him to see his brother going through everything his brother's going through, he saw an opportunity and he jumped on it. And I think he's, I give him credit for that.
Kudos to him for stepping up. Obviously, he's going to be going up multiple weight classes here, but getting the opportunity, as we always say, daring to be great. What's interesting about this, you mentioned that maybe Jermell was penciled in for the second fight, but it wasn't I remember years ago, there was a situation where David Haye signed a contract to fight a Klitschko brother, and then they were going to negotiate and figure out which one it was. For this next fight, in terms of Canelo's upcoming next fight, it wasn't new. It wasn't that he was deciding which brother, right? This was news to Canelo. This was news to a lot of people. And I know you spoke about this on your podcast with Mike Coppinger. This was news to a lot of people until recently that Jermell was going to step in, right?
Yeah, this was, they had everything but the posters printed for Jermall Charlo against Canelo. It was ticketed for September 30th. That was the fight. Jermall was on board with it. Canelo was on board with it. It would be the WBC middleweight champion versus the WBC and, of course, all the sanctioning bodies, super middleweight champion. So this was a done deal. It just got to the point for Jermall that he said, I can't do it. I can't be as focused as I need to be for that type of fight. And if we're being real, Jermall Charlo has been out and about some over the last year, and you watch some of these videos and he doesn't look like he's in the best place. He just doesn't look like he's as focused as he would probably need to be competitive in a fight against Canelo Alvarez. So the primary goal for Jamal now is to just get his life under control, figure out what's best for him, for his family, and then worry about boxing later. And we'll see what happens with Jermell. I mean, I know that the early spin has been, well, these guys were both 154 pounders. Jermell is a world champion. He's been a world champion for some time. He's got a great resume at 154. I still think this is an easier fight for Canelo Alvarez. I mean, Jermell was, life and death with Brian Castano over a couple of fights. Brian Castano is a good fighter. He's not Canelo Alvarez. And I personally believe Canelo, even if he's not the A+ fighter we've been used to seeing over the last few years, is still B+, A- level fighter. And I think that is going to be significantly better than Jermell jumping up to weight class. The other factor with Jermell is that, he hasn't fought in a long time, largely due to the hand injury he suffered in December, a hand injury that's taken some time to heal. He's had multiple kind of pushbacks of this fight against Tim Tszyu. How confident is Jermell going to be throwing that injured hand in a fight against Canelo? So, I think that this is shaping up to be certainly a marketable fight, undisputed versus undisputed. The first time that 2 4-belt champions have gotten in the ring in the men's division anyway. But if you're Canelo, you're feeling pretty good about your chances going into a fight with Jermell Charlo.
It's going to make for a really interesting contest, especially with this opponent change and the weight class and the undisputed and all of that stuff. I wanted to ask you, for a long time, we saw Canelo fighting on HBO, then on the Zone. There was one fight on Showtime in between. But we know recently he made the decision to go with PBC. It's been reported that it's a 3-fight deal. We mentioned the Charlos are up first for him. When you look at the opponents that were available to Canelo on the Zone, that would most likely be fighters on the Matchroom stable, Golden Boy stable, things like that, versus what was available to him in terms of opponents under the PBC umbrella. I'm just curious to your thoughts on Canelo's decision to do that. One, in terms of the opposition he'll be facing, and then also just in terms of a good business decision for Canelo himself.
I think this is the best business decision. This is the best legacy decision for Canelo Alvarez. Look, Canelo wanted to fight Dimitri Bivol in a rematch. We can debate the intelligence of that, because I don't think he would have won a rematch with Dimitri Bivol at 168 or 175, but he wanted that fight. The problem with that fight being made was that the money just wasn't there, at least not in terms of guarantees. I had heard that Bivol wanted 3 times what he made for the first fight against Canelo. Canelo obviously doesn't want to take a pay cut to fight someone the caliber of Dimitri Bivol. There just isn't that kind of money there anywhere, from DAZN, from Showtime, from ESPN, you name it. They're not going to put up the kind of money Canelo's looking for or what Bivol's looking for that particular fight. And beyond that, Edgar Berlanga, like, fun fighter, but even before the win over Jason Quigley, which was uninspiring at best, I didn't think Berlanga warranted that type of fight. There's nobody else really on the Matchroom side you would consider for that. I mean, Jaime Munguia, kind of interesting, but Munguia hasn't fought anybody either. And there's the whole problem with Golden Boy promoting Jaime Munguia. So this move to PBC, it's smart. He's going to get a lot of guaranteed money, probably 35 to 40 million every time he fights, if not more, on the back end of this deal. There are marketable opponents. I mean, Jermall Charlo certainly is not what he was a couple of years ago, but he's still a name. He's still undefeated. He's still a title holder. Obviously, Jermell undisputed at 154, and David Benavidez is out there. Most people believe David Benavidez should have gotten the first shot at Canelo. For whatever reason, Canelo decided to go in a different direction, but it's likely David Benavidez will, face Canelo in one of these fights of these deals. And there's also backup plans out there. I mean, we've talked about Canelo versus Demetrius Andrade for many years now, going back to 160. Andrade's still lurking out there with PBC affiliation now and fighting at 168. So this just made sense. It just made a ton of sense. Matchroom has had a good relationship with Canelo, but what happens when Canelo rolls through your entire stable is that you don't have a stable left to put him up against. And that's exactly what's happened since late 2021. So, Canelo will do these fights, and hell, who knows? Maybe the end of 2024, Edgar Berlanga has risen to a level where he's a worthy challenger. Jaime Munguia has risen to a level where he's a worthy challenger. Maybe somebody else emerges from that matchroom golden boy side of the proverbial street that makes sense. But for now, this deal makes the most business sense, and it makes the most boxing sense for Canelo Alvarez.
It's UFC 290. New customers download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code Curran, CURRAN. Bet just $5 to get $150 in bonus bets instantly. That's code Curran, CURRAN, only on DraftKings Sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In Massachusetts, call 800-327-5050 or visit gamblinghelplinema.org. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Tennessee and Kansas, gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER on behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort. In West Virginia, gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.1800gambler.net. All games regulated by the West Virginia Lottery. Please play responsibly. In partnership with Hollywood Casino at Charlestown Races. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. 21 plus in most eligible states, but age varies by jurisdiction. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details and state-specific responsible gambling resources. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. Eligibility and deposit restrictions apply. Terms at sportsbook.draftkings.com/MMA terms. It makes the most boxing sense, and the Bivol fight can still happen. The Bivol rematch can still happen down the line, as you mentioned, plus all those other big fights as well. You were mentioning the fighter pay there, and obviously that's a huge consideration for Canelo, guaranteed money, things like that. Curious to your thoughts of the landscape, because there has been a shift in a way to, let's say, new entities coming into boxing, right? And then they can put up a lot of money. And sometimes that can throw off a little bit of the competitive balance that's there, because let's say if you are a new entity, you may be willing to put out more money almost as like a loss leader just to get your platform up and going. But that can change the whole landscape, the whole dynamic. And I'm just curious to your thoughts about where we're at right now in terms of fighter pay at the highest level and the guarantees and things like that. We know that there's been talks about a card coming together in Saudi Arabia for December, and huge purses being mentioned in that world as well. And that kind of plays into what I'm talking about. So what are your thoughts on the landscape and pay and fighter pay at the highest level?
Yeah, for the last few years, certainly DAZN has disrupted that. They have been willing to pay elevated purses, for what have turned out to be lesser fights. They've been willing to commit a lot of money to Canelo Alvarez, to have Canelo on the platform. And I'm sure there's been a straight line to success, to viability, to subscriptions, all those things. But it's led to, inflated purses in terms of guarantees for fights. The Saudi stuff is a little bit different in that, they're not trying to get into boxing full time. They're trying to put on the occasional big event. And look, if they can pull off a doubleheader featuring Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury against Alexander Usyk, more power to them. I mean, that would be an event unlike any we've seen in boxing history. And it would be really compelling to watch. I think what's hurt boxing, continues to hurt boxing, are guarantees for pay-per-view. I know it's not a popular thing to say, to fighters, but there shouldn't be more than modest guarantees for pay-per-views. There really shouldn't. Like, fighters should be guaranteed the kind of money they would make on Showtime Championship Boxing, on DAZN, on ESPN, and then they should get almost all of, most of the upside. You have a little money for the promoters, a little money for the networks. The rest of the money goes to the fighters. What's killed boxing is that there are these massive guarantees that networks and promoters can't hope to make any money off. They can't even hope to get their money back in a lot of circumstances. And I really don't think that's fair. I'm not trying to, be a shill for a promoter, but I don't know why a promoter or a network has to take a loss. Like a pay-per-view in a lot of ways should be a risk, or a fighter shouldn't go on pay-per-view. If they think they can sell enough to warrant a 5, 10, 15, whatever $1 million purse, great, go do it. But the risk should be mutually absorbed. Everyone should bear some of it. And with these exorbitant guarantees, there's almost no risk to the fighters, going on these pay-per-views. So I'd love to see a point for boxing to get to where there are legitimate low 7-figure guarantees for big fights. And then the fighters get, 90% of the available upside when it comes to pay-per-view revenue. I think that's what would get boxing into a better place. And we get more, more competitive fights more often at that pay-per-view level.
At the end of the day, we need a sustainable business model, a business ecosystem to get these fights together, and then have those fights work, have those fighters come together within that ecosystem. And like you mentioned, you can have the upside there to make sure that everyone does get taken care of.
And there's a lot of merits to that. Like, I've had this conversation with Bob Arum many times, but how kind of pay-per-views in the 80s and even early 90s were run. And if a pay-per-view is successful and you give the fighter most of the upside, there's a chance for them to make a boatload, even more money than they'd make on a regular guarantee. So it certainly is a risk, but there is a reward attached to it. And maybe it does force fighters to take, more competitive fights before they get on pay-per-view. I think it's difficult for a fighter to be successful on pay-per-view when their fights on non-pay-per-view have been one-sided and have been kind of A side versus C or D side. I think it's difficult to draw fans in, the kind of fans that are willing to shell out $75, $85, for a pay-per-view. So I just think that model needs to change. But unfortunately, there's, whether it's DAZN, Showtime, ESPN, there's just always going to be someone that puts up a lot of guaranteed money to make, a pay-per-view happen when the reality is a lot of these fights, they don't really belong on pay-per-view, frankly. They belong on networks or on streaming services and off that pay-per-view platform.
There's also a change in the landscape in terms of technology. And I know that the Showtime bosses came out recently and talked about piracy effects, that it could maybe up to 30 to 40% in terms of taking away buys and things like that. And I'm sure that's a big problem that they're dealing with now that they didn't have in the same way before with the old pay-per-view model. So it's probably time for some type of update and change. The other part I wanted to ask you about, which is I guess the other news of the day, Anthony Joshua versus Dillian Whyte, the rematch signed August 12th. And this fight will actually not be on pay-per-view in America. It'll just be on the DAZN pay-per-view elsewhere. We were talking about the Saudi Arabia card, which has Anthony Joshua's name attached to it. And I saw the clip that you posted today with Sergio Mora, and you mentioned that this is a little bit of a win or go home fight for all involved, Anthony Joshua and Dillian Whyte. And so in a way, as a boxing fan, we say, that's great. Stay active. Fight Anthony Joshua. Fight now. Let's see you in some kind of competitive fight, and then we'll see you again in December because we want to see our fighters active. But I want you to put yourself in the head of Anthony Joshua as the businessman. You have this massive purse that's dangling there in December in Saudi Arabia, a huge payday. As a businessman, should Anthony Joshua be fighting right now, or should he just focus on a December payday?
I think if that Saudi deal was inked, signed, sealed, delivered, then Anthony Joshua probably should have stayed away. I mean, that if we're talking about the kind of money, it's likely we're talking about, $60 million, $70 million, whatever it may be. I have no idea what those numbers are ultimately going to be. But if that was locked in 100%, yeah, I think I'd probably have, taken the next few months off and gone straight into that next fight. But as we've seen, historically, getting deals done in the Middle East is complicated. I mean, we've already gone from this fight's going to happen in December to maybe it happens in January. Then who knows where we're going to be a month, 2 months from now. Anthony Joshua can't tie himself to, the prospect of a super lucrative deal in the Middle East that isn't set in stone. And look, Dillian Whyte, I think, is the right fight for him right now. I mean, Dillian is still dangerous and he's certainly still marketable. He's got his fans in the UK, and there'll be some buzz for this fight given the way that their first fight went 8 years ago. But Dillian Whyte's been knocked out in 2 of his last 4 fights. He did not look good in a win over Jermaine Franklin late last year. Like, if Anthony Joshua is like, I think 80 or 90% of what he's been in the past, he should stop Dillian Whyte. And look, it's a chance for him to get another fight under his belt with Derek James as his trainer, another full training camp. Rebuild his confidence even more, because I think that's been a problem for him over the last couple of years. I think there's a lot of merit to taking this fight, and he's going to make a boatload of money. I mean, they'll sell out O2 Arena, they'll do a decent number on pay-per-view. He's going to make a lot of money, for this fight. So, because that Saudi deal is not inked yet, I think this is the right decision for AJ. It is, as I said, though, it is win or go home, I think, for both. I mean, AJ's 33 years old. The idea that he's going to rebuild with 2 or 3 more Jermaine Franklin level fight, any other young up and coming heavyweight, I think for both these guys, they win, they go on to a big, massive payday against Deontay Wilder. They lose, and that's probably the end of their boxing careers.
It's a calculated risk in a way, because if he does win, he gets that confidence, that momentum, possibly a highlight reel knockout. He gets a payday in the interim, and that can set him up for even more success, possibly in December, riding off that confidence. Last thing I wanted to ask you about, I know, of course, you cover NBA as well as boxing, and I know there's probably specific challenges for each sport. We're talking about all these fights coming together, fights getting canceled in boxing. It can be frustrating and maddening for boxing fans at some point. I'm just curious, to your perspective, when you cover NBA, you look at these teams and they have a schedule lined up, and the best teams are going to face the best teams. There's going to be a playoff series, a final series to make that happen. So when you look at the different sports, do you ever look at NBA and be like, oh man, I wish there was a way that boxing could kind of adopt just this type of schedule and knowing the matchups that you're going to get?
Of course. I mean, but I'd almost settle for boxing mirroring what UFC is doing. UFC, at the very least, that pretty regularly you're going to get the best in each weight class fighting the best. And that's largely because UFC has, whatever it is, 85, 90% of the market share when it comes to MMA. I think that's obviously what holds boxing back. I mean, I'm of the opinion that if you could create a schedule in boxing that looks like MMA, that looks like, one of the major sports, one of the 4 major sports, boxing would quickly rise to the most popular sport among them. I just believe that. I mean, because we have history of it. You go back to the 80s, and before then, I mean, I worked for Sports Illustrated. Boxing was on the cover of SI all the time. Sugar Ray Leonard, Mike Tyson, Tommy Hearns, these were household names. These were guys every bit as popular as the NBA and NFL stars of their day. And, if they were competing at the level they were competing in the 80s right now, they'd still be as popular. They'd still be right up there. I mean, I've been to, I don't know how many NBA finals games. Like, the intensity pales in comparison to what you see and feel moments before a major fight. Something like, Canelo Alvarez against Gennady Golovkin part 1, or Mayweather against Pacquiao. We're probably going to feel with Bud Crawford and Errol Spence in July. If you can ever get that kind of consistency in boxing, and I give boxing credit, 2023 has been a really good year. PBC has been excellent at putting fights together this year, whether it's Ryan Garcia and Tank Davis or this upcoming one with Spence and Crawford. If they can just get year after year consistency, you will see boxing rise from the proverbial ashes and become, a closer to mainstream sport, certainly on the level of what UFC is right now, to some mainstream fans. I just don't hold my breath for it, because I think no matter how good this year has looked, next year could be awful. And we'll just be stuck on this never ending hamster wheel of rising and falling of boxing, until we're all sick of the sport and get out of it.
it seems like at least this year, a lot of fights coming together. We mentioned Spence Crawford, the big one, and it is a kudos, I think, also to boxing fans for just demanding these fights. Every time seeing these fighters demanding these fights, it seems like we're getting a few more undisputed fights, those type of unification fights. And it would just be nice, obviously, to see more of it. But at least to your point of this year, it's heading in the right direction, and hopefully that will continue. Chris Mannix, I want to thank you so much for the time. I know you got a lot to deal with on the ground over there, so I'm going to let you go. But thanks so much for taking the time to chat.
Yeah, and we can even say now that, you know, as we're recording, we're doing this in real time. The Ortiz Stanionis fight has been officially postponed. Golden Boys already issued a statement on it. They support Vergil's decision to back out 100%. I guess Floyd Schofield, who is one of the prospects Golden Boy is most excited about, will be moving up to the main event of this show. So it's a bummer for Vergil Ortiz. I hope that he can get his body right, get his health right to keep his career going, but he's got to kind of grab a hold of all this and make sure he's physically well enough to continue on in the sport.
And to be clear, there with the latest breaking news, the main event is off. The Vergil Ortiz fight is off, but the card will still be going on the Zone, and there still will be a card coming up on Saturday night.
There still will be a card. Floyd Schofield, I believe, will be the headliner. You've got Jojo Diaz on the card. Marlon Esparza is in a title unification bout on the card. So still some interesting fights there, but just, yeah, it's always kind of a bummer when you lose a main event as attractive as Ortiz Stanionis. If that kind of fight can be rescheduled, great. But again, it's all about Vergil's health. He's got to worry about that first and foremost before he thinks about boxing.
Chris Mannix, thank you so much for the time.
You got it.